Hello, I'm very late. I said I would start at 6:30 and it's 7:15. uh in my defense, I was ambitious. I one of my various BJJ classes is from 5 to 6, and I got back around 6:15 and I cranked my neck real hard doing we were practicing guillotine escapes, and I don't know what I did. I don't know how I fucked up a guillotine escape this bad, but I cranked the hell out of my neck. Like, I heard it crunch, my partner heard it crunch, the coach heard it crunch. So I got home and laid down and gave it some rest for a little bit. Had some good rolls, though. Didn't bother me after I crunched it, only like when I got home. Anyway, it's fine. It's just stiff. Ugh. I was supposed to grab the leg and push and with my shoulder and head, and I think I did the pushing with my head but not my shoulder, and also didn't grab the leg, and so I just like I just used all the force on my neck alone. Pro tip, the neck's not a great place to generate force from. Oh god. Anyway, so we'll get started in like a minute and change. We're going to read chapters 5 and 6. 5 is quite short, and then 6 is also kind of short. Cumulatively, it's about the length of the last chapter. I know I said I would like do that this last weekend maybe, but guess what? A lot of things happened, and I wasn't able to. Some personal life stuff got in the way. You know how it is. But anyway, get started in a minute. And that, maybe more than a minute, because my mic is on the fritz. Hang on. All right, test. Good. Okay. Good news is I'm getting a Rode N1 condenser mic with a Scarlett interface, so hopefully sound quality will be much better soon, though I think, a good portion of this is treatment. The desk I read at is not treated for sound, so there's surely some reverb that comes off of the wood. Otherwise, I try to surround myself with soundproofing stuff, but anyway, you get the idea. Okay. Chapter 5. Somewhat mystified by the commotion at the Abbey, Brother Francis returned to the desert that same day to complete his Lenten vigil in rather wretched solitude. He had expected some excitement about the relics to arise, but the excessive interest which everyone had taken in the old wanderer surprised him. Francis had spoken of the old man simply because of the part he had played, either by accident or by design of Providence, in the monks stumbling upon the crypt and its relics. The pilgrim was only a minor ingredient, as far as Francis was concerned, in a mandala design at whose center rested a relic of a saint. But his fellow novices had seemed more interested in the pilgrim than in the relic, and and even the abbot had summoned him not to ask about the box, but to ask about the old man. They had asked him 100 questions about the pilgrim, to which he could reply only, "I didn't notice," or "I wasn't looking right then," or "If he said, I don't remember." And some of the questions were a little weird. And so he questioned himself. Should I have noticed? Was I stupid not to watch what he did? Wasn't I paying enough attention to what he said? Did I miss something important because I was dazed? He brooded on it in the darkness while the wolves prowled about his new encampment and filled the nights with their howling. He caught himself brooding on it during times of the day that were assigned as proper for the prayers and spiritual exercises of the vocational vigil, and he confessed as much to Prior Cherokee the next time the priest rode his Sunday circuit. "You shouldn't let the romantic imaginations of the others bother you. You have enough trouble with your own," the priest told him, after chiding him for neglecting the exercises and prayers. "They don't think up questions like that on the basis of what might be true. They concoct the questions on the basis of what might be sensational if it just happened to be true. It's ridiculous. I can tell you that the Reverend Father Abbot has ordered the entire novitiate to drop the subject." After a moment, he unfortunately added, "There really wasn't anything about the old man to suggest the supernatural, was there?" with only the faintest trace of hopeful wonder in his tone. Brother Francis wondered too. If there had been a suggestion of the supernatural, he had not noticed it. But then, too, judging by the number of questions he had been unable to answer, he had not noticed very much. The profusion of the questions had made him feel that his failure to observe had been, somehow, culpable. He had become grateful to the pilgrim upon discovering the shelter, but he had not interpreted events entirely in terms of his own interests, in accordance with his own longing for some shred of evidence that the dedication of his lifetime to the labors of the monastery was born not so much of his own will as it was of grace, empowering the will, but not compelling it rightly to choose. Perhaps the events had a vaster significance that he had missed during the totality of his self-absorption. One moment, sorry, I need to drink some water. Okay, sorry. "What is your opinion of your own execrable vanity?" "My execrable vanity is like that of the fabled cat who studied ornithology, my lord." His desire to profess his final and perpetual vows, was it not akin to the motive of the cat who became an ornithologist, so that he might glorify his own ornithophagy, esoterically devouring Penthestis atricapillus, but never eating chickadees? For as the cat was called by nature to be an ornithophage, so was Francis called by his own nature hungrily to devour such knowledge as could be taught in those days, and because there were no schools but the monastic schools, he had donned the habit first of a postulant, later of a novice. But to suspect that God, as well as nature, had beckoned him to become a professed monk of the order, what else could he do? There was no returning to his homeland, the Utah. As a small child, he had been sold to a shaman who would have trained him as his servant and acolyte. Having run away, he could not return, except to meet grisly tribal justice. He had stolen a shaman's property, which was Francis's own person, and while thievery was an honorable profession among the Utah, getting caught was a capital crime when the thief's victim was the tribal warlock. Nor would he have cared to lapse back into the relatively primitive life of an illiterate shepherd people after his schooling at the abbey. But what else? The continent was lightly settled. He thought of the wall map in the abbey's library and of the sparse distribution of the cross-hatched areas, which were regions, if not of civilization, then of civil order, where some form of lawful sovereignty, transcending the tribal, held sway. The rest of the continent was populated very thinly by the people of the forest and the plain, who were, for the most part, not savages, but simple clanfolk, loosely organized into small communities here and there, who lived by hunting, gathering, and primitive agriculture, whose birth rate was barely high enough, discounting monster births and sports, to sustain the population. Pardon. The principal industries of the continent, excepting a few seacoast regions, were hunting, farming, fighting, and witchcraft, the last being the most promising, quote, industry for any youth, with a choice of careers and having in mind as primary ends maximum wealth and prestige. The schooling which Francis had been given at the Abbey prepared him for nothing which was of practical value in a dark, ignorant, and workaday world where literacy was non-existent, and a literate youth, therefore, seemed of no worth to a community unless he could also farm, fight, hunt, or show some special talent for intertribal theft, or for the divining of water and workable metal. Even in the scattered domains where a form of civil order existed, the fact of Francis's literacy would help him not at all if he must lead a life apart from the church. It was true that petty barons sometimes employed a scribe or two, but such cases were rare enough to be negligible, and were as often filled by monks as by monastery-schooled laymen. The only demand for scribes and secretaries was created by the church herself, whose tenuous, hierarchic web was stretched across the continent, and occasionally to far distant shores, although the diocesans abroad were virtually autonomous rulers, subject to the Holy See in theory, but seldom in practice, being cut off from New Rome less by schism than by oceans not often crossed, and could be held together only by a communication network. The church had become, quite coincidentally, and without meaning to be, the only means whereby news was transmitted from place to place across the continent. If plague came to the northeast, the southwest would soon hear of it, as a coincidental effect of tales told and retold by messengers of the church, coming and going from New Rome. If the nomadic infiltration in the far northwest threatened a Christian diocese, an encyclical letter might soon be read from pulpits far to the south and east, warning of the threat, and extending the apostolic benediction to men of any station, so long as they be skilled at arms, who, having the means to make the journey, may be piously disposed to do so, in order to swear fealty to our beloved son, N, lawful ruler of that place, for such a period of time as may seem necessary for the maintenance of standing armies there for defense of Christians against the gathering heathen horde, whose ruthless savagery is known to many, and who, to our deepest grief, tortured, murdered, and devoured those priests of God which we ourselves sent to them with the word, that they might enter as lambs into the fold of Lamb, whose flock on earth we are the shepherd. For, while we have never despaired nor ceased to pray that these nomadic children of the darkness may be led into the light and enter our realms in peace, for it is not to be thought that peaceful strangers should be repelled from a land so vast and empty. Nay, they should be welcomed who come peacefully, even should they be strangers to the visible church and its divine founder, so long as they hearken to that natural law, which is written in the hearts of all men, binding them to Christ in spirit, though they be ignorant of his name. It is nevertheless meet and fitting and prudent that Christendom, while praying for peace and the conversion of the heathen, should gird itself for defense in the northwest, where the hordes gather, and the incidents of heathen savagery have lately increased, and upon each of you, beloved sons, who can bear arms and travel to the northwest to join forces with those who prepare rightfully to defend their homes, lands, and churches, we extend and hereby bestow, as a sign of our special affection, the apostolic benediction. Francis had thought briefly of going to the northwest, if he failed to find a vocation to the order. But, although he was strong and skillful enough with blade and bow, he was rather short and not very heavy, while, according to rumor, the heathen was 9 feet tall. He could not testify as to the truth of the rumor, but saw no reason to think it false. Besides dying in battle, there was very little that he could think of to do with his lifetime, little that seemed worth the doing if he could not devote it to the order. His certainty of his vocation had not been broken, but only slightly bent by the scorching administered to him by the abbot and by the thought of the cat, who became an ornithologist when called only by nature to become an ornithophage. The thought made him unhappy enough to permit him to be overcome by temptation, so that, on Palm Sunday, with only 6 days of starvation remaining until the end of Lent, Prior Cherokee heard from Francis, or from the shriveled and sun-scorched residuum of Francis, wherein the soul remained somehow insisted, a few brief croaks which constituted what was probably the most succinct confession that Francis ever made, or Cherokee ever heard. "Bless me, Father. I ate a lizard." Prior Cherokee, having for many years been confessor to fasting penitents, found that custom had, with him, as with a fabled gravedigger, given it all a, quote, property of easiness, so that he replied with perfect equanimity and not even a blink, "Was it an abstinence day, and was it artificially prepared?" Page break. Holy Week would have been less lonely than the earlier weeks of Lent had the hermits not been by then past caring, for some of the Passiontide liturgy was carried outside the abbey walls to touch the penitents at their vigil sites. Twice the Eucharist came forth, and on Maundy Thursday the abbot himself made the rounds, with Cherokee and 13 monks to perform the mandatum at each hermitage. Abbot Arcos's vestments were concealed under a cowl, and the lion almost managed to seem humble as a kitten as he knelt and washed and kissed the feet of his fasting subjects with maximum economy of movement and a minimum of flourish and display, while the others chanted the antiphons. Mandatum novum do vobis, ut diligatis envisum. On Good Friday, a procession of the cross brought out a veiled crucifix, stopping at each hermitage to unveil it gradually before the penitent, lifting the cloth inch by inch for the adoration, while the monks chanted the reproaches. My people, what have I done to thee, or in what have I grieved thee? Answer, I exalted thee with virtuous power, and thou hangest me from the gibbet of a cross. And then, Holy Saturday. The monks carried them in one at a time, famished and raving. Francis was 30 pounds lighter and several degrees weaker than he had been on Ash Wednesday. When they set him on his feet in his own cell, he staggered, and before he reached the bunk, he fell. The brothers hoisted him into it, bathed him, shaved him, and anointed his blistered skin, while Francis babbled deliriously about something in a burlap loincloth, addressing it at times as an angel and again as a saint, frequently invoking the name of Leibowitz and trying to apologize. His brethren, forbidden by the abbot to speak of the matter, merely exchanged significant glances or nodded mysteriously among themselves. Reports filtered to the abbot. "Bring him here," he grunted at a recorder as soon as he heard that Francis could walk. His tone sent the recorder scurrying. "Do you deny saying these things?" Arcos growled. "I don't remember saying them, my lord abbot," said the novice, eyeing the abbot's ruler. "I may have been raving." "Assuming that you were raving, would you say it again now?" "About the pilgrim being the Beatus? Oh no, Magister Mace." "Then assert the contrary." "I don't think the pilgrim was the Beatus." "Why not just a straightforward, he was not?" "Well, never having seen the blessed Leibowitz personally, I wouldn't—" "Enough," the abbot ordered. "Too much. That's all I want to see of you and hear of you for a long, long time. Out! But just one thing. Don't expect to profess your vows with the others this year. You won't be permitted." For Francis, it was like a blow in the stomach with the end of a log. Chapter 6. As topic for conversation, the pilgrim remained forbidden subject matter in the abbey, but with respect to the relics and the fallout shelter, the prohibition was, of necessity, gradually relaxed, except for their discoverer, who remained under orders not to discuss them, and preferably to think of the matter as little as possible. Still, he could not avoid hearing things now and again, and he knew that in one of the abbey's workshops monks were at work on the documents, not only his own, but some others that had been found in the ancient desk before the abbot ordered that the shelter be closed. Closed! The news jolted Brother Francis. The shelter scarcely had been touched. Beyond his own adventure, there had been no attempt to penetrate further into the secrets of the shelter, except to open the desk which he had tried to open with no success before he noticed the box. closed, with no attempt to discover what might lie beyond the inner door marked Hatch 2, nor to investigate sealed environment. Without even removing the stones or the bones, closed, the investigation abruptly choked off without apparent cause. Then there began a rumor. Emily had a gold tooth. Emily had a gold tooth. Emily had a gold tooth. It was, in fact, quite true. It was one of those historical trivialities that managed somehow to outlive important facts which someone should have bothered to remember, but which went unrecorded until some monastic historian was forced to write, "Neither the contents of the memorabilia nor any archaeological source yet uncovered disclose the name of the ruler who occupied the White Palace during the middle and late 60s, although, Frater Barkis has claimed, not without supporting evidence, that his name was..." And yet, it was clearly recorded in the memorabilia that Emily had worn a gold tooth. It was not surprising that the Lord Abbot commanded that the crypt be sealed forthwith. Remembering how he had lifted the ancient skull and turned it to face the wall, Brother Francis suddenly feared the wrath of heaven. Emily Leibowitz had vanished from the face of the earth at the beginning of the flame deluge, and only after many years would her widower admit that she was dead. Page break. It was said that God, in order to test mankind, which had become swelled with pride as in the time of Noah, had commanded the wise men of that age, among them the blessed Leibowitz, to devise great engines of war, such as had never before been upon the earth, weapons of such might that they contained the very fires of hell, and that God had suffered these magi to place the weapons in the hands of princes, and to say to each prince, "Only because the enemies have such a thing have we devised this for thee, in order that they may know that thou hast it also, and fear to strike. See to it, my lord, that thou fearest them as much as they shall now fear thee, that none may unleash this dread thing which we have wrought." But the princes, putting the words of their wise men to naught, thought each to himself, "Ah, if I but strike quickly enough and in secret, I shall destroy those others in their sleep, and there will be none to fight back. The earth shall be mine." Such was the folly of princes, and there followed the flame deluge. Within weeks, some said days, it was ended after the first unleashing of the hellfire. Cities had become puddles of glass, surrounded by vast acreages of broken stone. While nations had vanished from the earth, the lands littered with bodies, both men and cattle, and all manner of beasts, together with the birds of the air, and all things that flew, all things that swam in the rivers, crept in the grass, or burrowed in holes. Having sickened and perished, they covered the land, and yet where the demons of the fallout covered the countryside, the bodies for a time would not decay, except in contact with fertile earth. The great clouds of wrath engulfed the forests and the fields, withering trees and causing the crops to die. There were great deserts where once life was, and in those places of the earth where men still lived, all were sickened by the poisoned air, so that, while some escaped death, none was left untouched, and many died even in those lands where the weapons had not struck because of the poisoned air. In all parts of the world, men fled from one place to other places, and there was a confusion of tongues. Much wrath was kindled against the princes and the servants of the princes, and against the magi who had devised the weapons. Years passed, and yet the earth was not cleansed. So it was clearly recorded in the memorabilia. From the confusion of tongues, the intermingling of the remnants of many nations, from fear, the hate was born. And the hate said, "Let us stone and disembowel and burn the ones who did this thing. Let us make a holocaust of those who wrought this crime, together with their hirelings and their wise men. Burning, let them perish, and all their works, their names, and even their memories. Let us destroy them all, and teach our children that the world is new, that they may know nothing of the deeds that went before. Let us make a great simplification, and then the world shall begin again." So it was that, after the deluge, the fallout, the plagues, the madness, the confusion of tongues, the rage, there began the bloodletting of the simplification, when remnants of mankind had torn other remnants limb from limb, killing rulers, scientists, leaders, technicians, teachers, and whatever persons the leaders of the maddened mob said deserved death for having helped to make the earth what it had become. Nothing had been so hateful in the sight of these mobs as the man of learning, at first because they had served the princes, but then later because they refused to join in the bloodletting and tried to oppose the mobs, calling the crowds bloodthirsty simpletons. Joyfully, the mobs accepted the name, took up the cry, "Simpletons! Yes! Yes, I'm a simpleton! Are you a simpleton? We'll build a town and we'll name it Simpletown, because by then all the smart bastards that caused all this, they'll be dead. Simpletons, let's go! This ought to show 'em. Anybody here not a simpleton? Get the bastard if he is!" To escape the fury of the simpleton packs, such learned people as still survived fled to any sanctuary that offered itself. When the Holy Church received them, she vested them in monks' robes and tried to hide them in such monasteries and convents as had survived and could be reoccupied, for the religious were less despised by the mob, except when they openly defied it and accepted martyrdom. Sometimes such sanctuary was effective. More often, it was not. Monasteries were invaded, records and sacred books were burned, refugees were seized and summarily hanged or burned. The Simplification had ceased to have plan or purpose soon after it began, and became an insane frenzy of mass murder and destruction, such as can occur only when the last traces of social order are gone. The madness was transmitted to the children, taught as they were, not merely to forget, but to hate, and surges of mob fury recurred sporadically, even through the fourth generation after the Deluge. By then, the fury was directed not against the learned, for there were none, but against the merely literate. Isaac Edward Leibowitz, after a fruitless search for his wife, had fled to the Cistercians, where he remained in hiding during the post-Deluge years. After 6 years, he had gone once more to search for Emily, or her grave, in the far southwest. There he had become convinced at last of her death, for death was unconditionally triumphant in that place. There, in the desert, he quietly made a vow. Then he went back to the Cistercians, took their habit, and after more years became a priest. He gathered a few companions about him and made some quiet proposals. After a few more years, the proposals filtered to Rome, which was no longer Rome, which was no longer a city, having moved elsewhere, moved again, and still again in less than 2 decades, after staying in one place for 2 millennia. 12 years after the proposals were made, Father Isaac Edward Leibowitz had won permission from the Holy See to found a new community of religious, to be named, it does say community of religious, which felt weird to me. Let me try that again. Father Isaac Edward Leibowitz had won permission from the Holy See to found a new community of religious, to be named after Albertus Magnus, teacher of St. Thomas and patron of men of science. Its task, unannounced, and at first only vaguely defined, was to preserve human history for the great-great-great-grandchildren of the children of the simpletons who wanted it destroyed. Its earliest habit was burlap rags and bindlestiffs, the uniform of the simpleton mob. Its members were either, quote, bookleggers or, quote, memorizers, according to the tasks assigned. The bookleggers smuggled books to the southwest desert and buried them there in kegs. The memorizers committed to rote memory entire volumes of history, sacred writings, literature, and science, in case some unfortunate book smuggler was caught, tortured, and forced to reveal the location of the kegs. Meanwhile, other members of the new order located a waterhole about 3 days' journey from the book cache and began the building of a monastery. The project, aimed at saving a small remnant of human culture from the remnant of humanity who wanted it destroyed, was then underway. Leibowitz, while taking his own turn at booklegging, was caught by a simpleton mob. A turncoat technician, whom the priest swiftly forgave, identified him as not only a man of learning, but also a specialist in the weapons field. Hooded in burlap, he was martyred forthwith by strangulation with a hangman's noose not tied for neck-breaking, at the same time being roasted alive, thus settling a dispute in the crowd concerning the method of execution. The memorizers were few, their memories limited. Some of the book kegs were found and burned, as well as several other bookleggers. The monastery itself was attacked thrice before the madness subsided. From the vast store of human knowledge, only a few kegs of original books and a pitiful collection of hand-copied texts rewritten from memory had survived in the possession of the order by the time the madness had ended. Now, after 6 centuries of darkness, the monks still preserved this memorabilia, studied it, copied and recopied it, and patiently waited. At the beginning, in the time of Leibowitz, it had been hoped, and even anticipated as probable, that the 4th or 5th generation would begin to want its heritage back. But the monks of the earliest days had not counted on the human ability to generate a new cultural inheritance in a couple of generations if an old one is utterly destroyed, to generate it by virtue of lawgivers and prophets, geniuses or maniacs. Through a Moses, or through a Hitler, or an ignorant but tyrannical grandfather, a cultural inheritance may be acquired between dusk and dawn, and many have been so acquired. But this new culture was an inheritance of darkness, wherein simpleton meant the same thing as citizen, meant the same thing as slave. The monks waited. It mattered not at all to them that the knowledge they saved was useless, that much of it was not really knowledge now, was as inscrutable to the monks in some instances as it would be to an illiterate wild boy from the hills. This knowledge was empty of content, its subject matter long since gone. Still, such knowledge had a symbolic structure that was peculiar to itself, and at least the symbol interplay could be observed. To observe the way a knowledge system is knit together is to learn at least a minimum knowledge of knowledge until someday or some century, an integrator would come, and things would be fitted together again. So time mattered not at all. The memorabilia was there, and it was given to them by duty to preserve, and preserve it they would if the darkness in the world lasted 10 more centuries, or even 10,000 years, for they, though born in that darkest of ages, were still the very bookleggers and memorizers of the Beatus Leibowitz, and when they wandered abroad from their abbey, each of them, the professed of the order, whether stablehand or lord abbot, carried as part of his habit a book, usually a breviary these days, tied up in a bindlestiff. A little page break here. After the shelter was closed, the documents and relics which had been taken from it were quietly rounded up, one at a time and in an unobtrusive manner, by the abbot. They became unavailable for inspection, presumably locked in Arcos's study. For all practical purposes, they had vanished. Anything which vanished at the level of the abbot's study was not safe subject matter for public discussion. It was something to be whispered about in quiet corridors. Brother Francis seldom heard the whispers. Eventually, they stopped, only to be revived when a messenger from New Rome muttered with the abbot in the refectory one night. An occasional snatch of their muttering reached adjacent tables. The whispers lasted for a few weeks after the messenger's departure, then subsided again. Brother Francis Gerard of Utah returned to the desert the following year and fasted again in solitude. Once more he returned, weak and emaciated, and soon was summoned into the presence of Abbot Arcos, who demanded to know whether he claimed further conferences with members of the heavenly hosts. "Oh, no, my lord abbot, nothing by day but buzzards." "By night?" Arcos asked suspiciously. "Only wolves," said Francis, adding cautiously, "I think." Arcos did not choose to belabor the cautious amendment, but merely frowned. The abbot's frown, Brother Francis had come to observe, was the causative source of radiant energy which traveled through space with finite velocity, and which was as yet not very well understood, except in terms of its withering effect upon whatever thing absorbed it, that thing usually being a postulant or novice. Francis had absorbed a 5-second burst of the stuff by the time the next question was put to him. "Now, what about last year?" The novice paused to swallow. "The old man?" "The old man?" "Yes, Dom Arcos." Trying to keep any hint of a question mark out of his tone, Arcos droned. "Just an old man, nothing more? We're sure of that now." I think it was just an old man, too." Father Arcos reached wearily for the hickory ruler. "Whack! Deo Cratius! Whack! Deo!" As Francis returned to his cell, the abbot called after him down the corridor. "By the way, I intended to mention—" Yes, Reverend Father." "No vows this year," he said absently, and vanished into his study. That's the end of chapter 6. Hang tight with me for just a moment. Maybe I'll read chapter 7 too. Why not? Chapter 7. Well, let me drink water first. Let me just double check how long this is, actually. It's a little long. I think, actually, I might save 7 for next time, because I just checked, and... I'll read it. Chapter 7. Brother Francis spent 7 years in the novitiate, 7 Lenten vigils in the desert, and became highly proficient in the imitation of wolf calls. For the amusement of his brethren, he summoned the pack to the vicinity of the abbey by howling from the walls after dark. By day, he served in the kitchen, scrubbed the stone floors, and continued his classroom study of antiquity. Then, one day, a messenger from a seminary in New Rome came riding to the abbey on an ass. After a long conference with the abbot, the messenger sought out Brother Francis. He seemed surprised to find that youth, now fully a man, still wearing the habit of a novice and scrubbing the kitchen floor. "We've been studying the documents you discovered for some years now," he told the novice. "Quite a few of us are convinced they're authentic." Francis lowered his head. I'm not permitted to mention the matter, Father," he said. "Oh, that." The messenger smiled and handed him a scrap of paper bearing the abbot's seal and written in the ruler's hand. "Ecce inquisitor curiae, ascolta et obsequire, arcos eol abbas." "It's all right," he added hastily, noticing the novice's sudden tension. "I'm not speaking to you officially. Someone else from the court will take your statements later. You know, don't you, that your papers have been in New Rome for some time now? I just brought some of them back." Brother Francis shook his head. He knew less, perhaps, than anyone concerning high-level reactions to his discovery of the relics. He noticed that the messenger wore the white habit of the Dominicans, and he wondered with a certain uneasiness about the nature of the court whereof the Black Friar had spoken. There was an inquisition against Catharism in the Pacific Coast region, but he could not imagine how that court could be concerned with relics of the Beatus. "Ecce inquisitor curiae," the note said. Probably the abbot meant investigator. The Dominican seemed a rather mild-humored man and was not carrying any visible engines of torture. "We expect the case for canonization of your founder to be reopened soon," the messenger explained. "Your abbot Arcos is a very wise and prudent man," he chuckled, "by turning the relics over to another order for examination and by having the shelter sealed before it was fully explored. Well, you do understand, don't you?" "No, Father. I had supposed he thought the whole thing too trivial to spend any time on." The Black Friar laughed. "Trivial? I think not. But if your order turns up evidence, relics, miracles, and whatever, the court has to consider the source. Every religious community is eager to see its founder canonized. So your abbot very wisely told you, hands off the shelter. I'm sure it's been frustrating for all of you, but better for the cause of your founder to let the shelter be explored with other witnesses present." "You're going to open it again?" Francis asked eagerly. "No, not I. But when the court is ready, it will send observers. Then anything that is found in the shelter that might affect the case will be safe, in case the opposition questions its authenticity. Of course, the only reason for suspecting that the contents of the shelter might affect the cause is, well, the things you found." "May I ask how that is, Father?" "Well, one of the embarrassments at the time of the beatification was the early life of Blessed Leibowitz, before he became a monk and a priest. The advocate for the other side kept trying to cast doubt on the early period, pre-deluge. He was trying to establish that Leibowitz never made a careful search, that his wife might even have been alive at the time of his ordination. Well, it wouldn't be the first time, of course. Sometimes dispensations have been granted, but that's besides the point. The Advocatus Diaboli was just trying to cast doubt on your founder's character, and trying to suggest that he had accepted holy orders and taken vows before being certain his family responsibility was ended. The opposition failed, but it may try again. And if those human remains you found really are... He shrugged and smiled. Francis nodded. It would pinpoint the date of her death. At the very beginning of the war that nearly ended everything. And in my own opinion, well, that handwriting in the box, it's either that of the Beatus or a very clever counterfeit. Francis reddened. I'm not suggesting that you were involved in any counterfeit scheme, the Dominican added hastily upon noticing the blush. The novice, however, had only been remembering his own opinion of the scrawl. Tell me, how did it happen? How you located the site, I mean? I'll need the whole story of it. Well, it started because of the wolves. The Dominican began taking notes. A few days after the messenger's departure from the abbey, Abbot Arcos called for Brother Francis. Do you still feel that your vocation is with us? Arcos asked, pleasantly. If my Lord Abbot will pardon my execrable vanity... Oh, let's ignore your execrable vanity for a moment. Do you or don't you? Yes, Magister Meus. The abbot beamed. Well now, my son, I think we're convinced of it too. If you're ready to commit yourself for all time, I think the time's ripe for you to profess your solemn vows. He paused for a moment and, watching the novice's face, seemed disappointed not to detect any change of expression. What's this? You're not glad to hear it? You're not... Oh, what's wrong? While Francis's face had remained a politely attentive mask, the mask gradually lost color. His knees buckled. Suddenly, Francis had fainted. 2 weeks later, the novice Francis, having perhaps set an endurance record for survival time on desert vigils, left the ranks of the novitiate and, vowing perpetual poverty, chastity, obedience, together with the special pledges peculiar to the community, received blessings and a bindlestiff in the abbey and became forever a professed monk of the Albertian order of Leibowitz, chained by chains of his own forging to the foot of the cross and the rule of the order. Thrice the ritual inquired of him, If God calleth thee to be his book-legger, wilt thou suffer death before betraying thy brethren? And thrice Francis responded, Aye, Lord. Then arise, brother book-leggers and brother memorizers, and receive the kiss of brotherhood, ecce quam bonum et quam jucundum. Brother Francis was transferred from the kitchen and assigned to less menial labor. He became apprentice copyist to an aged monk named Horner, and if things went well for him, he might reasonably look forward to a lifetime in the copy room, where he would dedicate the rest of his days to such tasks as the hand-copying of algebra texts and illuminating their pages with olive leaves and cheerful cherubim surrounding tables of logarithms. Brother Horner was a gentle old man, and Brother Francis liked him from the start. Most of us do better work on the assigned copy, Horner told him, if we have our own project too. Most of the copyists become interested in some particular work from the memorabilia and like to spend a little time at it on the side. For example, Brother Sorrel over there, his work was lagging and he was making mistakes, so we let him spend an hour a day on a project he chose for himself. When the work gets so tedious that he starts making errors in copy, he can put it aside for a while and work on his own project. I allow everyone to do the same. If you finish your assigned work before the day's over but don't have your own project, you'll have to spend the extra time on our perennials. Perennials? Yes, and I don't mean plants. There's a perennial demand from the whole clergy for various books, missals, scriptures, breviaries, the Summa, encyclopedia, and the like. We sell quite a lot of them. So when you don't have a pet project, we'll put you on the perennials when you finish early. You've plenty of time to decide." "What project did Brother Sorrow pick?" The aged overseer paused. "Well, I doubt if you'd even understand it. I don't. He seems to have found a method for restoring missing words and phrases to some of the old fragments of original text in the memorabilia. Perhaps the left-hand side of a half-burned book is legible, but the right-hand side of each page is burned, with a few words missing at the end of each line. He's worked out a mathematical method for finding the missing words. It's not foolproof, but it works to some degree. He's managed to restore 4 whole pages since he began the attempt." Francis glanced at Brother Sorrow, who was an octogenarian and nearly blind. "How long did it take him?" the apprentice asked. "Oh, about 40 years, said Brother Horner. "Of course, he's only spent about 5 hours a week at it, and it does take considerable arithmetic." Francis nodded thoughtfully. If 1 page per decade could be restored, maybe in a few centuries. "Even less," croaked Brother Sorrel, without looking up from his work. "The more you fill in, the faster the remainder goes. I'll get the next page done in a couple of years. After that, God willing, maybe—" His voice tapered off into a mumble. Francis frequently noticed that Brother Sorrel talked to himself while working. "Suit yourself," said Brother Horner. "We can always use more help on the perennials, but you can have your own project when you want one." The idea came to Brother Francis in an unexpected flash. "May I use the time," he blurted, "to make a copy of the Leibowitz blueprint I found?" Brother Horner seemed momentarily startled. "Well, I don't know, son. Our Lord Abbot is, well, just a little sensitive on that subject, and the thing may not belong in the memorabilia. It's in the tentative file for now." "But you know they fade, brother, and it's been handled a lot in the light. The Dominicans had it in New Rome for so long." "Well, I suppose it would be a rather brief project, if Father Arcos doesn't object, but—" He waggled his head in doubt. "Perhaps I could include it as one of a set," Francis hastily offered. "What few recopied blueprints we have are so old they're brittle. If I made several duplicates of some of the others—" Horner smiled wryly. "What you're suggesting is that by including the Leibowitz blueprint in a set, you might escape detection?" Francis reddened. "Father Arcos might not even notice, if he happened to wander through?" Francis squirmed. "All right," said Horner, his eyes twinkling slightly. "You may use your unassigned time to make duplicates of any of the recopied prints that are in bad condition. If anything else gets mixed up in the lot, I'll try not to notice." Brother Francis spent several months of his unassigned time in redrawing some of the older prints from the memorabilia's files before daring to touch the Leibowitz print. If the old drawings were worth saving at all, they needed to be recopied every century or two anyhow. Not only did the original copies fade, but often the redrawn versions became nearly illegible after a time due to the impermanence of the inks employed. He had not the slightest notion why the ancients had used white lines and lettering on a dark background in preference to the reverse. When he roughly resketched a design in charcoal, thereby reversing the background, the rough sketch appeared more realistic than the white on dark, and the ancients were immeasurably wiser than Francis. If they had taken the trouble to put ink where blank paper would ordinarily be, and leave slivers of white paper where an inked line would appear in a straightforward drawing, then they must have had their reasons. Francis recopied the documents to appear as nearly like the originals as possible, even though the task of spreading blue ink around tiny white letters was particularly tedious and quite wasteful of ink, a fact which caused Brother Horner to grumble. He copied an old architectural print, then a drawing for a machine part whose geometry was apparent but whose purpose was vague. He redrew a mandala abstraction, titled it I'm struggling. Let's try again. He redrew a mandala abstraction titled Stator WNDG MOD 73A 3PH 6P 1800 RPM 5 horsepower CLA squirrel cage, which proved completely incomprehensible and not at all capable of imprisoning a squirrel. The ancients were often subtle. Perhaps one needed a special set of mirrors in order to see the squirrel. He painstakingly redrew it anyhow. Only after the abbot, who occasionally passed through the copy room, had seen him working at another blueprint at least 3 times, twice Arcos had paused for a quick look at Francis's work, did he summon the courage to venture to the memorabilia files for the Leibowitz blueprint nearly a year after beginning his free time project. The original document had already been subjected to a certain amount of restorative work. Except for the fact that it bore the name of the Beatus, it was disappointingly like most of the others he had redrawn. The Leibowitz print, another abstraction, appealed to nothing, least of all to reason. He studied it until he could see the whole amazing complexity with his eyes closed, but knew no more than he had known before. It appeared to be no more than a network of lines connecting a patchwork of doohickey, squiggles, quids, laminulae, and thingamabobs. The lines were mostly horizontal or vertical and crossed each other with either a little jump mark or a dot. They made right-angle turns to get around doohickey, and they never stopped in mid-space, but always terminated at a squiggle, quiggle, quid, or thingamabob. It made so little sense that a long period of staring at it produced a stupefying effect. Nevertheless, he began work at duplicating every detail, even to the copying of a central brownish stain, which he thought might be the blood of the blessed martyr, but which Brother Jairus suggested was only the stain left by a decayed apple core. Brother Jairus, who had joined the apprentice copy room at the same time as Brother Francis, seemed to enjoy teasing him about the project. "What, pray," he asked, squinting over Francis's shoulder, "is the meaning of transistorized control system for Unit 6B, learned brother?" "Clearly, it is the title of the document," said Francis, feeling slightly cross. "Oh, clearly, but what does it mean?" "It is the name of the diagram which lies before your eyes, brother simpleton. But what does Jairus mean?" "Very little, I'm sure," said Brother Jairus with mock humility. "Forgive my density, please. You have successfully defined the name by pointing to the creature named, which is truly the meaning of the name. But now, the creature diagram itself represents something, does it not? What does the diagram represent?" "The transistorized control system for Unit 6B, obviously." Jairus laughed. "Quite clear, eloquent. If the creature is the name, then the name is the creature. Equals may be substituted for equals, or the order of an equality is reversible. But may we proceed to the next axiom? If quantities equal to the same quantity may substitute for each other is true, then is there not some same quantity which both name and diagram represent? Or is it a closed system?" Francis reddened. "I would imagine," he said, after pausing to stifle his annoyance, "that the diagram represents an abstract concept rather than a concrete thing. Perhaps the ancients had a systematic method for depicting a for depicting a pure thought. It's clearly not a recognizable picture of an object." Yes, it's clearly unrecognizable," Brother Jairus agreed with a chuckle. "On the other hand, perhaps it does depict an object, but only in a very formal, stylistic way, so that one would need special training or special eyesight. In my opinion, it's a high abstraction of perhaps transcendental value expressing a thought of the Beatus Leibowitz." "Bravo! Now, what was he thinking about?" "Why, a circuit design," said Francis, picking the term out of the block of lettering at the lower right. What discipline does that art pertain to, brother? What is its genus, species, property, and difference? Or is it only an accident?" Jairus was becoming pretentious in his sarcasm, Francis thought, and decided to meet it with a soft answer. "Well, observe this column of figures and its heading, electronic parts numbers. There was once an art or science called electronics, which might belong to both art and science. Aha! Thus settling genus and species. Now as to difference, if I may pursue the line, what was the subject matter of electronics? That too is written, said Francis, who had searched the memorabilia from high to low in an attempt to find clues which might make the blueprint slightly more comprehensible, but to very small avail. The subject matter of electronics was the electron, he explained. So it is written indeed. I am impressed. I know so little of these things. What, pray, was the electron? Well, there is one fragmentary source which alludes to it as a negative twist of nothingness. What? How did they negate a nothingness? Wouldn't that make it a somethingness? Perhaps the negation applies to twist. Ah, then we would have an untwisted nothing, eh? Have you discovered how to untwist a nothingness? Not yet, Francis admitted. Well, keep at it, brother. How clever they must have been, those ancients, to know how to untwist nothing. Keep at it and you may learn how. Then we'd have the electron in our midst, wouldn't we? Whatever would we do with it? Put it on the altar in the chapel? All right, Francis sighed. I don't know, but I have a certain faith that the electron existed at one time, although I don't know how it was constructed or what it might have been used for. How touching, chuckled the iconoclast, and returned to his work. The sporadic teasing of Brother Jerris saddened Francis, but did nothing to lessen his devotion to his project. The exact duplication of every mark, blotch, and stain proved impossible, but the accuracy of his facsimile proved sufficient for the deception of the eye at a distance of 2 paces, and therefore adequate for display purposes, so that the original might be sealed and packed away. Having completed the facsimile, Brother Francis found himself disappointed. The drawing was too stark. There was nothing about it to suggest at first glance that it might be a holy relic. The style was terse and unpretentious, fittingly enough, perhaps, for the Beatus himself, and yet a copy of the relic was not enough. Saints were humble people who glorified not themselves but God, and it was left to others to portray the inward glory of the saintly by outward, visible signs. The stark copy was not enough. It was coldly unimaginative and did not commemorate the saintly qualities of the Beatus in any visible way. Glorificamus, thought Francis, while he worked on the perennials. He was copying pages of the Psalms at the moment for later rebinding. He paused to regain his place in the text and to notice meaning in the words, for after hours of copying he had ceased to read at all and merely allowed his hand to retrace the letters which his eyes encountered. He noticed that he had been copying David's prayer for pardon, the 4th penitential psalm, Miserere mei, Deus, for I know my iniquity and my sin is always before me. It was a humble prayer, but the page before his eyes was not written in a humble style to match. The M in miserere was gold leaf inlay. A flourishing arabesque of the interwoven gold and violet filaments filled the margins and grew into nests around the splendid capitals at the beginning of each verse. However humble the prayer itself, the page was magnificent. Brother Francis was copying only the body of the text onto new parchment, leaving spaces for the splendid capitals and margins as wide as the text lines. Other craftsmen would fill in riots of color around his simply inked copy and would construct the pictorial capitals. He was learning to illuminate, but was not yet proficient enough to be trusted at gold inlay work on the perennials. Glorificamus. He was thinking of the blueprint again. Without mentioning the idea to anyone, Brother Francis began to plan. He found the finest available lambskin and spent several weeks of his spare time at curing it and stretching it and stoning it to a perfect surface, which he eventually bleached to a snowy whiteness and carefully stored away. For months afterward, he spent every available minute of his free time looking through the memorabilia, again seeking clues to the meaning of the Leibowitz print. He found nothing resembling the squiggles in the drawing, nor anything else to help him interpret its meaning. But after a long time, he stumbled across a fragment of a book which contained a partially destroyed page whose subject matter was blueprinting. It seemed to be a piece of an encyclopedia. The reference was brief, and some of the article was missing, but after reading it several times, he began to suspect that he, and many earlier copyists, had wasted a lot of time and ink. The white-on-dark effect seemed not to have been a particularly desirable feature, but one which resulted from the peculiarities of a certain cheap reproduction process. The original drawing from which the blueprint had been made had been black on white. He had to resist a sudden impulse to beat his head against the stone floor, all that ink and labor to copy an accident. Well, perhaps Brother Horner need not be told. It would be a work of charity to say nothing about it because of Brother Horner's heart condition. The knowledge that the color scheme of blueprints was an accidental feature of those ancient drawings lent impetus to his plan. A glorified copy of the Leibowitz print could be made without incorporating the accidental feature. With the color scheme reversed, no one would recognize the drawing at first. Certain other features could obviously be modified. He dared change nothing that he did not understand, but surely the parts tables and the block-lettered information could be spread symmetrically around the diagram on scrolls and shields. Because the meaning of the diagram itself was obscure, he dared not alter its shape or plan by a hair, but since its color scheme was unimportant, it might as well be beautiful. He considered gold inlay for the squiggles and doohickey, but the thingamabob was too intricate for gold work, and a gold quid would seem ostentatious. The quiggles just had to be done jet black, but that meant that the lines would be off black to assert the quiggles. While the unsymmetrical design would have to stay as it was, he could think of no reason why its meaning would be altered by using it as a trellis for a climbing vine, whose branches, carefully dodging the quiggles, might be made to furnish an impression of symmetry, or render asymmetry natural. When Brother Horner illuminated a capital M, transmuting it into a wonderful jungle of leaves, berries, branches, and perhaps a wily serpent, it nevertheless remained legible as M. Brother Francis saw no reason for supposing that the same would not apply to the diagram. The general shape overall, with a scrolled border, might well become a shield, rather than the stark rectangle which enclosed the drawing in the print. He made dozens of preliminary sketches. At the very top of the parchment would be a representation of the triune God, and at the very bottom the coat of arms of the Albertian order, with, just above it, the image of the Beatus. But there was no accurate likenesses of the Beatus in existence, so far as Francis knew. There were several fanciful portraits, but none dating back to the Simplification. There was, as yet, not even a conventional representation, although tradition told that Leibowitz had been rather tall and somewhat stooped. But perhaps when the shelter was reopened. Brother Francis's preliminary sketchwork was interrupted one afternoon by his sudden awareness that the presence which loomed behind him and cast its shadow across the coffee table was that of... No, please, Beate Leibowitz, aude me, mercy, Lord, let it be anybody but... Well, what have we here? Rumbled the abbot, glancing over his designs. A drawing, my lord abbot. So I notice, but what is it? The Leibowitz blueprint. That one you found? What? It doesn't look much like it. Why the changes? It's going to be... Speak louder! An illuminated copy! Brother Francis involuntarily shrieked. Oh. Abbot Arco shrugged and wandered away. Brother Horner, a few seconds later, while wandering past the apprentice's desk, was surprised to notice that Francis had fainted. That's the end of Chapter 7, and I think a good place to stop. Thanks for hanging out and listening in today, and if you're listening later on YouTube, thanks for that too. I saw someone comment last week that they were curious about when and where I read. My schedule is ill-conceived, amorphous, inchoate. I don't have a good schedule. I usually read on Twitch, and I'll usually let folks know like a day or two ahead of time in case they want to catch it live. Usually I don't get too many people watching live, at most one or two. But, you know, if you're interested, now you know, I suppose. Yeah. I hope folks are liking this. I know it's different from like the usual fantasy or sci-fi we usually read. It's a little more grounded in real life activity, I suppose. But I don't know. I really liked this book when I first read it, and I'm hoping you folks do too. And hoping you're seeing some of the ways it's inspired other media since it was first published. The concept of the Albertian Order of Leibowitz has made its way into a number of media. You know, Fallout's an obvious example. I think I mentioned Caves of Cud previously, and there are many others. Babylon 5, in fact, also references it towards the end. Yeah, it was a very, you know, a pivotal text, and it's a fun read. All right, folks, I will catch you sometime again, either this weekend or next week early, maybe. We'll see. Feel free to shoot me an email if you got any questions or feedback or comments. If there's anyone out there who uses a Rode N1A and Scarlet interface and has any hot tips, feel free to shoot me an email, because I'm going to be learning from scratch. Not that there's like, I don't know, it's not going to be that hard, but you never know. Every now and then someone has some bit of special advice that would have been handy to know in the past. All right. Take it easy, folks, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good one.